The day the celebrities went away. Hi, I'm Ken Ray, welcoming you into episode 192 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. It was a little over a week ago as we record this that Twitter was turned upside down. Why was Barack Obama asking me for $1,000 in Bitcoin, and would he really give me back $2,000? I thought the Twitter hack was fun and funny. I no longer think that. We'll dive into why and what we think happened on episode 192 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. Twitter Hack 2020. I reached out to a few people to interview about the big Twitter hack, and to my surprise, I couldn't find anybody who felt on top of it enough to speak about it. Now I know why. The more you think you know about this story, the less certain you can be. I mean, there is stuff that we all know. Business Insider ran a piece last week stating the obvious. Some of the world's biggest Twitter accounts got hacked. Big as in lots of followers and controlled by big names. 130 accounts is what we hear, including those run by or for Elon Musk, Joe Biden, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Barack Obama, Kanye West, Kim Kardashian, Wiz Khalifa, Floyd Mayweather, lots of high-profile individuals, as well as the Twitter accounts for businesses such as Uber and Apple. Each compromised Twitter account posted roughly the same message, that the account's owner was feeling generous or was giving back to the community. If people reading the message sent an amount of Bitcoin to a wallet listed in the tweet, that person would get double the amount back. Not surprisingly, that was not true. Interesting aside, while Apple has had a Twitter account since 2011 with 4.6 million followers today, the company has never actually used that Twitter account. So the Bitcoin scam was the official Apple account's first ever public tweet. Don't bother looking for it now, it's gone. Now, not knowing exactly what they were dealing with, but knowing that it was high-profile, verified accounts involved, Business Insider says Twitter took the unprecedented step on Wednesday of blocking all verified accounts from tweeting temporarily as it worked to secure its services. The company also locked the affected accounts until their owners could satisfactorily identify themselves and take back control. And finally, Twitter's data download feature was temporarily disabled after a few horses were already out of the barn. As part of its rolling updates on the issue, Twitter said for up to 8 of the Twitter accounts involved, the attackers took the additional step of downloading the account's information through our Your Twitter Data tool. This is a tool that's meant to provide an account owner with a summary of their Twitter account details and activity. We are reaching out directly to any account owner where we know this to be true. None of the 8 were verified accounts. So it wasn't Wiz Khalifa's info that was downloaded, just Rando Calrissians or Totes Randos. They may have gotten other info on Khalifa, though. Wednesday night, as I was preparing notes for this show, Ars Technica shared news of another update from Twitter. 1 week into incident-related revelations, Ars says hackers accessed direct messages for 36 high-profile account holders in last week's epic compromise of Twitter, with one of the affected users being an elected official from the Netherlands, the social media company said late Wednesday. The company also said the intruders were able to view email addresses, phone numbers, and other personal information for all 130 hijacked accounts. Now, you may be wondering how this happened. That gives you, Twitter, and the FBI something in common. The company is said to be working with the Bureau to get to the bottom of things. Not that we don't know anything. The hackers got access to Twitter's internal tools, then used them to wreak havoc, according to Business Insider. A piece from Motherboard said the same thing, and that screenshots of the internal Twitter admin tool used in the breach had been posted online. Those seem to have been the real deal since, as a piece from CNET points out, Twitter spent last Wednesday night into Thursday morning getting the screenshots off of Twitter. Somebody who had shared the screenshots with CNET said Twitter forced them to delete the tweet, and they gave them a 12-hour ban from tweeting or interacting with anyone on the website. The piece went on to say that Twitter was removing the images for violating the website's rules because they show personal information, including the account's contact information. So they'd apparently like the world to think that they were removing the screenshots to protect the compromised users, not to cover their own backsides. Not sure why it couldn't be both, but okay. Saying that the hackers used an internal Twitter admin tool is only part of the how. Perhaps the bigger part of the how is how'd they get the access. Now, I want to say this is where the story gets weird, but it's been weird, hasn't it? The night this happened, Twitter said it had found what we believe to be a coordinated social engineering attack by people who successfully targeted some of our employees with access to internal systems and tools. That prompted some headlines like this one from Mac Daily News: Twitter breach caused by employees who fell for social engineering scheme. Fell for, got paid for. Why quibble? Oh, right. One is an unfortunate incident. The other is a crime. I assume it's a crime anyway. One's an accident. The other's doing something wrong with intent. Having acknowledged that the story is already weird, this is where it gets really confusing. In a New York Times report on Friday, says the Business Insider report, individuals who claim to be involved allege that a figure going by the name Kirk first gained access to the internal Twitter tools and then told others about it. He is purported to have obtained login details to the tools from an internal Twitter Slack channel he gained access to. Kirk began by selling access to coveted OG usernames before things escalated to the Bitcoin scam that attracted international attention. See, when I first started reading up on this, I thought this edition of the checklist would end on the dangers of social engineering. And yeah, it's dangerous. Wetware, aka human capital, aka people, that tends to be the weakest link in a given system. If you want to hear more about that, check out Checklist 45, Social Engineering, the Human Element of Hacking. I thought it would also be a good chance to revisit the value of two-factor authentication. And two-factor authentication is valuable. Usually. Some of the people who were hacked, though, say that they were employing 2FA on their Twitter accounts. From run-of-the-mill bad guys, 2FA will often save your bacon. You'll want to check out Checklist 139, 2FA 101, to hear more about why. Twitter hack was an inside job, sources say. That's the headline of a piece on the blog for Secure Mac, actually. According to that, on the day of the incident, Jason Kobler, the editor-in-chief of Motherboard, said that Motherboard journalists had spoken to people directly involved in the hack. According to Kobler, these inside sources say that they persuaded a Twitter employee to use an internal tool to change the email addresses of multiple high-profile accounts, allowing the hackers to gain control of them. One source said that the Twitter employee was paid for their help. To be clear, Secure Mac is not saying that. Secure Mac's not even saying that Motherboard is saying that. Rather, Secure Mac is saying that Motherboard is saying that somebody involved in the incident is saying that, and you start to see how convoluted this story is. And it's about to get more so. Krebs on Security ran a long piece Wednesday fleshing out the story and naming names, true names in some cases. Krebs actually referenced the New York Times piece, and OG Twitter handles I mentioned earlier. While those may not have played a part in the 130 takeovers, they may get Twitter and authorities closer to whoever was responsible. I'm sorry, to whomever was responsible. Let's do a bit on the handles. Before the Bitcoin scam messages, Krebs says several highly desirable short character Twitter account names changed hands, including @L, @6, and @W. known as Original Gangster or OG accounts. Short character profile names confer a measure of status and wealth in certain online communities, and such accounts can often fetch thousands of dollars when resold in the underground. Last week, just after the hacks, the New York Times interviewed a few people who said that they had direct contact with whomever was behind the hacks. In fact, these guys were customers of the big bad, though they say they had nothing to do with the big bad thing. If you want to understand it all, I suggest you bring pencil and paper. Kirk is involved. Krebs says the people involved in obtaining these OG accounts on July 15th said they got them from a person identified only as Kirk, who claimed to be a Twitter employee. Kirk is said to have contacted a couple of folks, a hacker called LOL and another called Ever So Anxious. They broker OG handles. Kirk wanted to know if they wanted to handle selling the ones he or she was about to liberate, for which LOL and Ever So Anxious would get a cut. So what were they doing talking to the Times? Krebs said they wanted to make it clear that they were only customers of the person who had access to Twitter's internal employee tools and were not responsible for the actual intrusion or Bitcoin scams that took place that day. Glad they got that off their conscience, though it may not matter legally. Krebs has Allison Nixon, Chief Research Officer at the cyber investigations company Unit 221B, saying even if they weren't involved, the OG handle brokers were involved. She argues, you have to have hackers like Kirk who can get the tools and the money people who can help them profit, the buyers and the resellers. Without the buyers and resellers, there is no incentive to hack into all the social media and gaming companies. Mark Rosh, Unit 221B's general counsel and a former U.S. federal prosecutor, takes the argument further, saying anyone involved in the Twitter compromise can be charged with conspiracy. In this instance, Krebs defines conspiracy as a legal concept in the criminal statute which holds that any co-conspirators are liable for the acts of any other co-conspirator in furtherance of the crime, even if they don't know who those other people are in real life or what else they may have been doing at the time. Rush is quoted in the piece saying conspiracy has been called the prosecutor's friend because it makes the agreement the crime. It's a separate crime in addition to the underlying crime, whether it be breaking into a network, data theft, or account takeover. The "I just bought some usernames and gave or sold them to someone else" excuse is wrong because it's a conspiracy, and these people obviously don't realize that. Big as all of this sounds, the worries may be even bigger. We'll get to why in a moment, but first a word about MacScan 3 from Secure Mac. Chances are you're doing more with your computer today than you were just a few months ago, thanks to all the staying in and social distancing. I'm not saying you're doing anything risky with your computer. I will say, though, now would be a terrible time for anything bad to happen to it. Actually, any time would be a terrible time for anything bad to happen to your computer, which is why you need a good anti-malware solution. A good solution like MacScan 3. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by Secure Mac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for the Mac for over 20 years. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your machine. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. Then once you decide to buy for less. You can take a little off your subscription to MacScan 3 with offer code CHECKLIST. Try it first, watch it kick those tracking cookies to the curb. Then when you're ready to buy for less with offer code CHECKLIST at securemac.com/MacScan. twitter.com/MaxScan. We've covered the nuts and bolts of the Twitter attack, and I did leave a few out intentionally, and I'm sure other parts will be found as the days go on. I mentioned the ones they found just a couple of hours before I started recording, right? We're going to end the day, though, with bigger thoughts around the whole incident. Bigger and, sorry to say, scarier. Business Insider put it succinctly. The hack underscored the vulnerability of social media services like Twitter, which are used by world leaders and government agencies to communicate with the public. Now, I'll admit, I thought it was funny when it happened. Additionally, I was glad it hadn't happened to my account, and I really hope that nobody was dumb enough to give $1,000 worth of Bitcoin to Apple, expecting to get $2,000 back. But maybe I shouldn't say dumb. These were verified accounts, blue checkmark accounts. While not as prestigious as an OG handle, verification is supposed to mean something. In an essay for The Conversation, Laura DeNardis, professor and interim dean, American University School of Communication, wrote under the headline, "Twitter hack exposes broader threat to democracy and society." Seems extreme, except for the value of account verification. Quoting DeNardis, "Social media, and Twitter in particular, is now the public sphere. Using a hijacked account, it would be simple to wreak economic damage, start a national security crisis, or create a social panic." Examples she lays out include threats to market stability, coordinated rogue tweaks from the accounts of Apple, Facebook, Google, Netflix, and Microsoft could easily crash the stock market, at least temporarily, eroding confidence in the markets. They could cause societal panic. A false warning about an impending terrorist attack from a major media company account could create a dangerous public panic. There are threats to national security. Twitter is the platform of choice for President Donald Trump. A foreign adversary hijacking his account and announcing a nuclear strike on North Korea could be catastrophic. And finally, there are threats to democracy. Hijacked accounts could sow well-timed political disinformation that sways or seeks to delegitimize the 2020 presidential election. As such, she says, what happened is not about financial crime. It's a serious threat to us all. Not to bum you out. To begin to regain trust, DeNardis says, Twitter will have to clarify what happened and explain what the company will do to mitigate such an attack in the future. I wonder, though, whether that's true. I heard about the Twitter hack on Twitter. I watched the fun that non-verified accounts had with it on Twitter. And when it was over, which, by the way, it still isn't, I mentioned the thing a couple of hours ago, right? When it was over, I went back to watching what's happening in Portland on Twitter and keeping up with news of coronavirus on Twitter and watching the occasional cat video on Twitter. We're not leaving Twitter. And while DeNardis acknowledges that, and while she does think the Facebooks and Twitters of the world do have to be held accountable, she also thinks you and I have to be held accountable. She wraps her essay saying the disclosure that the Twitter hack originated via a social engineering technique is a reminder that cybersecurity is an individual human responsibility as much as a technical or institutional one. We are all responsible. Twitter was originally not designed to be something so politically relevant. Now we all know it is. That's why this latest attack is so serious. Now, every piece I mentioned in today's show is worth a read, especially the piece from Business Insider if you want a quick overview, the piece from Krebs on security if you want to feel for a few minutes like you know something about hacking, and the DeNardis essay from The Conversation if you want to know why it matters. We'll have links to all the sources I mentioned today in the notes for this show at securemac.com/checklist. We keep notes there for every show we do, and you can listen there as well. It all starts at one place, securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you would like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.